In the late summer of 1969, a group of ordinary, middle-class youths walked into a Los Angeles home and committed a string of brutal murders. Among the victims was actress Sharon Tate. 24 years later, outside Waco, Texas, a completely different group engaged federal agents in a 51-day standoff. That siege ended when their compound was consumed by fire, killing over 70 people inside. Looking closer, the people involved were individuals who stepped into a vacuum of community and stepped out having surrendered their free will entirely. How does a normal person reach the exact point where they trade their autonomy for acts of extreme violence? Psychologists point to a phenomenon called abdication syndrome. It's a subconscious urge to hand over the heavy responsibility of your own life to an all-knowing, parent-like figure. The individual ego simply dissolves into the leader. The devotion seen in these groups resulted from a specific psychological blueprint, a repeatable set of tactics utilized by both Charles Manson and David Koresh. Charles Manson and Vernon Howell, the man who would later call himself David Koresh, shared a nearly identical starting point across different decades. Both were born to unwed teenage mothers and raised in dysfunctional, unstable environments. Manson spent his childhood cycling through reform schools and prisons, while Howell was eventually institutionalized in a Texas mental hospital. Later, both men gravitated toward the Los Angeles music scene, desperate for fame. They both recorded music and tried to secure the recognition they believed they were owed, and both ultimately failed. These shared backgrounds of rejection and instability forged two manipulative psychopaths. They learned to weaponize their own trauma, identifying and exploiting the specific vulnerabilities in others. The first phase of the blueprint is target acquisition. In 1967, Manson set up in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district to recruit young drifters. Years later, Koresh sought out spiritual seekers drawn to his religious sect in Waco. They offered free love, absolute acceptance, and a ready-made family to those who felt abandoned by society. Once they gained trust, the leaders severed their followers' ties to the world. Manson moved his group to Spawn Ranch, a dilapidated movie set isolated in the California desert. Koresh achieved the same physical control at the Mount Carmel compound, making his followers entirely dependent on the sect for their survival. By removing followers from their support systems and non-believers, the leaders became the group's sole source of reality. With isolation secured, the blueprint moves to breaking the ego, using physical exhaustion and sensory control to dismantle a follower's internal defenses. Manson used LSD to dissolve psychological boundaries. He would mandate group trips while remaining relatively sober himself, allowing him to program his followers while they were in a highly suggestible state. This Department of Justice report outlines Koresh's methods. He would preach for hours, intentionally depriving listeners of food and sleep. Under these conditions, he established absolute authority over his followers, enforcing rigid rules and publicly berating anyone who broke them. Combining physical exhaustion with the breakdown of personal boundaries forces the mind into an abdicated state. Critical thinking stops, leaving the follower entirely submissive to the leader's will. To demand ultimate obedience, both men shed their human identities and claimed divine authority. Vernon Howell legally changed his name to David Koresh. He claimed the lineage of the biblical King David and the status of a new Messiah, a divinely commissioned messenger. Manson similarly rebranded himself, teaching his followers that they were the reincarnation of the original Christians and that the establishment represented the Romans. Both leaders weaponized paranoia to bind their groups together. They preached an imminent end-times conflict, using this fear to justify stockpiling massive caches of illegal weapons. By convincing followers the outside world was the enemy, the leader positioned himself as the only source of safety. Engineered paranoia eventually collides with the real world, leading to catastrophic violence. In 1969, Manson ordered his followers to commit the Tate LaBianca murders, intending to ignite a prophesied race war he called Helter Skelter. Decades later, Koresh's weapon stockpiling triggered an ATF raid. The resulting 51-day standoff turned fatal when the compound caught fire during the final assault. Manson's death sentence was commuted to life in prison, while Koresh died inside his burning compound. Both left behind a legacy of victims who were led to their deaths. The blueprint was effective enough that followers in both groups chose murder or self-destruction over questioning their leader's authority. Extreme devotion is the engineered result of a systematic, coercive blueprint. The markers of this control, isolation, love bombing, and the claim of absolute authority, remain common in modern groups. Recognizing the mechanics of abdication syndrome is the ultimate defense against those who demand the surrender of our autonomy.